All right, welcome to another edition of Quarantine AP English. Trying something new, going to use the whiteboard a little bit. All right, so for this first video for today, I wanted to talk about the Landlady that you all read yesterday. Hopefully you've had a chance to go through it a few times and put together an outline. If you haven't yet had time to do it, hit pause on this video and come back to it later. So I want you to recall the rubric, which has three parts to it, right? The thesis, evidence, and commentary, and then sophistication. Oh, that's not how you spell sophistication. Right, so those three, and that's worth 1 point. This is worth 4 points, and this is worth 1 point. And I want to talk just a little bit about these three today. First, right, the thesis and what the thesis needs to do, right? And the thesis needs to answer the what question. Okay, and so the prompt for the Landlady said, in a well-organized essay, analyze the speaker's complex portrayal of the landlady. So what is the complex portrayal of the landlady? Who is she? What's complex about her? We talked about this a little bit in class. We talked about how she is kind of nervous, nosy, but also lonely, right? And that would be complex, right? If we talk about, in this poem, the landlady is portrayed as nosy but lonely, right? That would work. We also talked about how, and that satisfies the thesis, right? That's an arguable thesis. There's another part that you may decide to put into your thesis, and that is the line of reasoning. Right, line of reasoning, and really, what line of reasoning is the structure for your essay. If you recall being taught a three-part essay, which please don't ever do again, that's where you telegraph the structure of your essay in your thesis, and in all of those silly examples from years past, it had three parts because we thought every essay had to have 3 body paragraphs or something ridiculous like that. Anyway. A way we might telegraph our line of reasoning in our thesis is if we say something like, the portrayal begins with a character who is curious and lonely, but develops into someone with darker purposes and darker desires, right? And so what we end up doing is we show that line of reasoning through what might be called points of interpretation. Sorry, this doesn't work this well. This is probably going to be the last whiteboard video. All right, so points of interpretation. And that idea is that we would then organize based on elements of our interpretation, maybe how the interpretation itself is developing through the essay, right? So that's one way. I've transitioned into the second part of the essay here, the evidence and commentary, and talking about the organization of it, right? We could do it by points of interpretation. The one I just talked about was, she kind of goes from curious to darker, maybe obsessive, maybe a stalkery, right? That's the adjective form of stalker, which is kind of stalkery. Anyway, and that might be, right? And we might do, 2 or 3 body paragraphs based on that and use that as a way to organize. The other way to do what I think is kind of the worst way, but is maybe a simpler way, is by literary device. And as you read this, I'm sure certainly there are a lot of literary devices here. There are, I might, if I'm going to do it by literary device, I might talk about the use of figurative language here, like the personification and simile, comparing the landlady to like a camera at one point, comparing her to an animal with curious flesh and who has ticklish ears, those kinds of things. And I might, use that to show how she is watching people, and show those qualities of her, the curiousness maybe through that. Other things I might talk about include the syntax, right? Like if you look at the end, you might notice the repetition of the word all, and that might really suggest that obsessiveness, right? No, all. And maybe you notice other syntax throughout, right? And that's a way you can do it. All right, so hopefully you found some evidence. Hopefully you used FIDS, right? Figurative language, imagery, detail, diction, whew, my brain broke for a second, syntax. Use those to come up with some evidence and some things to talk about. Now, the final thing I want to talk about for this, because I think it's the hardest element of the rubric, is the sophistication point. And there are a few ways you can get the sophistication point. You can it can be through the complexity of the analysis. Okay, do that. Analyze the complexity of a poem. It can be through sophistication of writing. Right? And my advice for that is to write as well as you can. But the final, and this is the one I want to talk about, is you can situate it, the poem, the piece in context. Comment on the universality of the piece, right? And so here we're talking about this creepy landlady who has access to her boarders' lives, and she, right? And so what we could do is we could situate this in a larger context, and I would say mainly we would do this in our intro and conclusion. But we might talk about how we're like the boarders, how our lives are vulnerable to people like this all the time. And it's land folk, landladies, landlords, but it's also doctors who have all of our medical records. It's and nurses and people who have access to that sort of thing. It's garbage collectors who have access to everything we throw out, our whole lives out there. How often are we vulnerable to people whose actual job it is to deal with our stuff, and how vulnerable we are to the intrusion there, right? Things we don't even expect to happen, and we could then take the poem here, which is the landlady, and apply it to like our own lives, situate it within this context that we all share. We could ask the question, why would people read this poem? And have that be a way into your analysis, a way to situate it. Why would we read The Landlady? Because we're all vulnerable to this sort of voyeuristic behavior where people can pry into our lives because we really are, so much of our lives are vulnerable to things like that. That's a way you could do it. All right. Okay. I don't think I'm going to use this whiteboard again. But anyway, till next time. There's another video coming today. See ya.